Yo, what's going on, guys? My name is Alex, and apparently Nikola Jokic is a stat padder, and he's only winning the MVP award, at least in this race so far, because he's white. Before we listen out to Kendrick Perkins and try to debunk what he's saying, if you guys do end up enjoying this video, make sure to like and sub. I'm trying to get to 1,000 subs by the end of the year, so it would mean a lot. Anyways, let's get started.
It goes on, conversations goes on in that locker room, and players know what their stats are.
Are you sitting here and saying Nikola Jokic is having his numbers padded? Is that what you're saying?
You heard what the hell I said. He had 8 games where he had single-digit shot attempts. And for a while, it was 9.5 assists he was averaging, 9.8. And all of a sudden, I saw those shot attempts and his points go down, and I started to see his assists go up.
Look, players have come out and openly admitted that they are aware of certain milestones, whether that's getting a triple-double in a game or even reaching a certain amount of points. I'm not saying that doesn't happen, but you can't just come out and definitively say that Jokic is striving to stat pad, just like the same way that Jokic doesn't know. He could very well be lying through his teeth and saying he's not stat padding, or people around him could be saying he's not stat padding. They could all be lying. We obviously don't know, so it's not definitive. But let's focus on these 8 games that he is referring to. Is it true that Jokic wasn't always averaging over 10 assists? Yeah. Is it also true that over the season his shot attempts have lowered while his assists went up? The answer again is yes. But when you dig into the 8 games that Perkins is referring to, you will notice that half the games were either too early in the season for Jokic to be focused on padding his stats, and the other half of the games were blowouts, so there was no need to shoot that much. And even in those games, he was either at 9 or 10 assists, so if he truly wanted the stat pad, he could have stayed in those games, but he didn't. Based on this alone, I would say Jokic isn't a stat padder, but even if you still think he is probably the least committed to it.
Let me get us in outside of our comfort zone a little bit. When we talk about the MVP conversation, is it Uchiwali or is it one Mike? That's what Jay-Z said. I just want to know, what song are we dancing to? Because I'm walking up into the club, I got my J's on. I didn't know it was a dress code to put on church shoes. So when I say that, Stephen A., when I come on here every single time and I ask, what is the criteria for the MVP and how the goalposts move, I'm asking these questions for a reason.
I actually agree with Perkins a little bit on this one. In the past 6-7 years, the requirements for what an MVP would actually look like has changed. Based on the history of the award, it usually goes to someone who obviously puts up great stats, but then their team is, the 1 or 4 seed depending on what conference they play in. And it also depends on how many games they've played. These have been some of the most consistent things to measure an MVP player, but last year when Jokic won, and even in 2017 when Westbrook won, their teams were both the 6th seed. So if you wanted to argue about whether Jokic should have won the MVP last year, I would understand. But to step up now and question him when he and the Nuggets are by far the best team in the West based on the standings, and they are up there with one of the best records in the league, it's just confusing, especially since Perkins, as of recently, has been favoring Joel Embiid as an MVP, even though Giannis Antetokounmpo is putting up comparable stats, has had to overcome injuries to his teammates, and he still has a better record. So in this case, why isn't Perkins favoring Giannis to win MVP?
When it comes down to guys winning MVP since 1990, it's only 3 guys that won the MVP that wasn't top 10 in scoring. Do you know who those 3 guys were?
Who were they?
Steve Nash, Jokic, and Dirk Nowitzki. Now, what do those guys have in common? I'll let it sit there and marinate. You think about it.
Now this is where Kendrick Perkins just completely loses me. A couple of things are just disingenuous about these critiques, and it's not only about Jokic, but it's also about Nash and Dirk. To act like scoring is the end-all be-all for what an MVP looks like is just utterly stupid. Obviously, Steve Nash wasn't scoring over 20 points per game, but he was still giving you almost 19 a game, and he was more than making up for it with his playmaking, where he led the league in assists with 10.5 per game, and he still led the Suns to a 3rd seed. Also with Dirk, I love how he brought up the criteria of having to be a top 10 scorer in the NBA, and said Dirk didn't do it when he won back in the 06-07 season. It literally took me 2 minutes to find out that he actually tied with T-Mac for 10th at 24.6 points per game, and even if he was 11th, are we really going to nitpick to such a degree where if Dirk was 0.1 point away from being a top 10 scorer, he couldn't be in the MVP conversation? That is stupid. And for Jokic, his last 2 MVPs, he was a top 10 scorer. So when he brings up Jokic, he's talking about this year. And while yes, Jokic is not a top 10 scorer right now, just like Nash, Jokic is affecting the game in other areas like his playmaking. So again, we can't just rely on points per game for these arguments. There is always more to it. Lastly, it's nasty that he only brought up these guys who won MVP that weren't top 10 in scoring because it was limited to past 1990. If you literally bring it back 1 year to 1990, which Perk wanted to exclude it by the way, you would see that Magic Johnson also fits this criteria. So I guess Perkins must also think Magic wasn't deserving of that MVP and his 2 other previous MVPs as well.
We moved the goalpost so much, so don't come giving me, oh, they're the number 1 seed this year in the Western Conference, so he's averaging triple-double. That's why he should be the clear-cut favorite. They wasn't the number 1 seed last year. They was actually the number 6 seed. One seed from being in the play-in tournament. So that's my whole thing is like, why we move the goalposts for certain people and then for others, we don't. So when I was trying to make a case 2 years ago for Chris Paul, when I was saying, hey, you know what? The Phoenix Suns, Chris Paul, same organization, same position, same results. Why is he not getting the love that Steve Nash was getting when he was in Phoenix as far as the MVP candidate or winning or being the MVP frontrunner? I'm just trying to say, Stephen A., am I missing something?
There is no way Perkins is actually going to question whether Nash should have won his second MVP because he wasn't a top 10 scorer, but then literally last year ride for Chris Paul, despite him not being a top 10 scorer. Look, I get that the Suns last year won 64 games and had the best record in the league, but in my opinion, that had a lot more to do with the collective of talent, depth, and coaching than just CP3. Also, if we wanted to stay consistent with Perk on having to be a top 10 scorer, then he really should have pushed for Booker since he was 8th in scoring that season, and he was by far the best player on the Suns. But no, that wouldn't fit your nasty argument. I find it annoying as well that Perkins is complaining about the goalpost being moved, but he is changing the criteria as well. So Kendrick Perkins, I ask you, what is your criteria? Because you can't question other people while also being inconsistent. And now for the part which I really wish I didn't have to bring up, but he has alluded to it many times at this point. Although he doesn't say it directly, Perkins is trying to indirectly say that Jokic is benefiting from the goalpost being moved because he is white, and to me this is some sorry ass shit. I cannot believe I have to say this, but if you're voting or changing the criteria for someone based on the color of their skin, you have a problem. If a player checks off all the boxes of great stats, team success, games played, and things of that nature, then they should be rewarded for it off of that only. Also, Jokic isn't the first person to benefit from voting inconsistencies. Westbrook won in 2017 and obviously he isn't white. I remember back in the offseason that people would only see Jokic winning a 3rd MVP if he averaged a triple-double and had the best record either in the West or in the entire league. That is literally happening right now, and in my eyes people just cannot comprehend it, and it's sad. Jokic is doing stuff we've never seen from a big man before, and he's been one of the best players for years and will continue to be one of the best players in the league. But we are continuing to find ways to discredit him, and I just don't think it's fair, and he is not the only person who has had to face similar scrutiny. Before he won a chip, Giannis was in the same conversations of sure being great, but because of shortcomings in the playoffs, he would never get his respect. Once he won that chip, Giannis got so much more respect, even if it did take a little bit after the fact to do it, and I think Jokic will have to do the same as well. I just wish the media members like Perkins would cut the crap out and stop using these stupid arguments like the one we debunked today to bring down one of the great players in our league and just appreciate greatness. Well, those are my thoughts on Perkins and his whole thoughts on the MVP rates with Jokic. Let me know down below what y'all think below. If you enjoyed, make sure to like and sub. Check out my socials down below in the description. And you can check out this video somewhere on the screen where I go over some old head narratives and I tell you the biggest problem that stems from those old head narratives. Anyway, see you on the next one. Peace out.